So when people say there are more extreme weather events, the next question to ask is, well, which ones? There has not been detected increases in flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms. So it is a very nuanced picture, and in the conversation that goes from what just happened, I saw it on Twitter or X or YouTube, and then what I read about in the newspaper, something gets lost in that game of telephone.
If in fact the number of major weather events hasn't changed, why are every trusted news source tying every flood and every hurricane to climate change?
Too often we have politics-based science rather than science-based politics.
So, is the Earth about to explode because of, climate change? We're about to find out. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Click on that little bell icon for notifications. And find the Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite platform. All right, Dr. Roger Pielke, you've studied the science. When does the Earth get destroyed?
John, that's no moon out there. The good news is that climate change is not like a Death Star coming with a beam to destroy the Earth. It is real, it is serious, and it poses risks. But what we hear about in the media, often from policymakers, is a little bit different than what you find in the carefully worded scientific assessments.
Let's go over just a little bit of your background so people know that you actually know what you're talking about. You worked at NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, for how long?
I was there for about 8 or 9 years in the 90s and early 2000s.
What were you studying?
I was studying extreme weather events. I started out studying Hurricane Andrew, 1992, the Great Midwest Floods of 1993. My work is at that messy place where science and decision-making intersect. So I did a lot of work looking at the use and value of weather forecasts, eventually climate trends, the economics of natural disasters. And that, as the climate issue became more and more significant, over the now decades, I've branched into pretty much many of the areas that are important in climate change. So whether it's energy policy, responding to natural disasters, I've done a lot of that.
Are you a climate scientist?
I'm not. I'm a public policy expert with a background in math and political science. A lot of the work that's done in the climate space is very interdisciplinary. The word climate scientist gets thrown around a lot. I don't call myself a climate scientist. I publish a lot in the climate science literature, but for better or worse, I'm an interdisciplinary public policy scholar.
Did you have any idea that you were going to become a nationally controversial guy?
No.
Was that your goal, was to become a guy from CU who testified and said something people didn't like and the world was going to come down on you?
Yeah, it's one of those things where anytime you go to grad school, you write a PhD, it's an esoteric, narrow topic. I was in a field called science and technology policy. I'm still in that field. And it was kind of a backwater. It's, in the field of political science, public policy is kind of down near the bottom because it's applied work. And inside of public policy, science and technology policy is near the bottom of that. And here we are in 2024, and whether it's COVID or climate change, issues where science meets politics are hot topics. And so, over my career, I've been surprised at some of the places I find myself testifying before Congress, meeting with cabinet secretaries, internationally.
But let's talk about the video.
Yep.
Paris Hilton or one of the Kardashians had the sex video that launched their career. You had quite a different video. You were testifying on Capitol Hill on what?
So this is about a decade ago. I testified before the Senate and then the House on what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, it's an international body that's put together to assess the state of the science. They had just come out with a report in 2012. It was called the Special Report on Extreme Events, extreme weather. And since I had focused on extreme weather for a long time, a lot of my work was cited in that report. I was invited to testify before Congress on what did the report say about hurricanes, floods, drought, and so on. So I testified, and at the beginning of congressional testimony, you give a 5-minute opening statement. And my little opening statement, for whatever reason, went viral on YouTube. It got 400,000 hits within the first 2 weeks, I think, of being online. That got me a lot of attention.
What did you say that was so controversial?
Apparently, most people find it hard to believe that in the United States, landfalling hurricanes have not increased over 100 years. The IPCC does not detect trends in floods or drought or tornadoes, much less attribute those phenomena to the emission of greenhouse gases.
You're nuts. You're crazy. Because I've seen it on television. I've heard it on NPR. I've heard that these hurricanes, these floods, these huge weather events are directly caused by climate change. So who am I supposed to believe? Them or my lying eyes?
Yeah. This is an area where what's called the conventional wisdom has departed significantly from where the scientific community is. So I'm a big supporter of scientific assessments. The IPCC, as I mentioned, was created in 1988 to assess what the scientific literature and data says on climate change. There's something like a couple 100,000 papers on climate change published every year across the disciplines. So it's a really difficult challenge to know, well, what does the science actually say? But on issues like, have hurricanes become more intense, or are there more of them? Are there more droughts? Are they more intense? We have really good data. And it turns out that what you might read in your favorite newspaper or see on your favorite TV channel, in 2024, and even in 2013 when I testified, is strongly at odds, which you'll find in the scientific assessments.
The settled science, and I've told it's been settled, that there's a full consensus, is that we've had more of these major weather events. You're telling me no?
So there is a very strong consensus on the reality of climate change, the fact that the emission of greenhouse gases is altering the climate. And the best place to see that is in temperature readings. So when people say there are more extreme weather events, the next question to ask is, well, which ones? And it turns out that there are more heat waves. If you see the data, you'll see that there's been a very strong rise since the 1960s in the number of intense heat waves. In many places, there has been more what's called extreme precipitation. So precipitation at the 95th percentile or greater, for example. But there has not been detected increases in flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms. So it is a very nuanced picture, and in the conversation that goes from what just happened, I saw it on Twitter or X or YouTube, and then what I read about in the newspaper, something gets lost in that game of telephone.
Tell me why that is. If in fact the number of major weather events hasn't changed, why are every trusted news source tying every flood and every hurricane to climate change?
Yeah, so I mean, over my career, I've had either a front row seat or a backstage pass to all of this. There was a fateful decision made in the environmental community probably about 20 years ago. It was about the time that Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, came out. And the decision was to bring climate change home to people. It turns out that if you tell people, well, we might see a 2 or 3 or 4 degree temperature rise in 100 years, people will say, well, I got to go pick up the kids from soccer practice and I got to pay the bills and bother me later. And so climate advocacy was having kind of an existential crisis. And at that time they said, well, maybe if we focus the issue on extreme weather, very photogenic, it affects people's lives, it has dollar costs, unfortunately people suffer and die, then maybe people will take the climate change issue seriously. Everything changed in 2006 when Al Gore's movie came out. It had a hurricane coming out of a smokestack. Hurricane was spinning the wrong way, but details.
Science.
And so there has been this effort to associate extreme weather with climate change, even though the scientific community and the IPCC and the assessments don't provide strong support for that. And so it is this very strange situation where a lot of attention is paid these days, rightly, to evidence and science and facts. But this is one area where what you read in the popular press and what you read in the scientific literature diverges a great deal. And for me, I was doing this research before this divergence happened, and there have been times when I thought maybe I should have done my PhD on congressional apportionment or something something nerdier like that. But for better or worse, that's the area where I have some
When
expertise.
you tell people who are the climate alarmists that no, these weather events are not happening because of climate change, no, there's not more of them, what's the response?
So I do this exercise with my students in my classes, and I give them a kind of a pop quiz on day one. What do you think about this, that, or the other thing, including more hurricanes or more floods, and many are shocked, surprised even. But it's not just climate alarmists or people who are worried about climate change. It wasn't too long ago, maybe 5 years ago, I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, and in my draft I had a statement in there that said, hurricane landfalls in the United States have not become more common since at least 1900. And my editor at the Wall Street Journal took it out. And he said, I took that out not because it's wrong. It's right. That's what the data says. Just go to National Hurricane Center. He said, but no one will believe it. And if they don't believe it, they won't believe anything else you wrote in there. So,
Wow.
so the conventional wisdom has become...
Stop there for a second. Because I'm having gotta take a moment to try to digest this. So the Wall Street Journal, very well respected editorial page, they say, if you put this on there, people won't believe you because this falsehood is so prevalent. This earth is flat falsehood that if you put it on there,
That's exactly
that is a terrifying statement, given that our policy, including all the craziness over COVID, was supposed to be science-based. But it's not science-based, it's politics-based.
Too often we have politics-based science rather than science-based politics, and it's not unique to the climate issue. It's not unique to Democrats or Republicans. It is part of the 2020s and where we're at, and so it makes it really difficult to engage topics like COVID, like climate change, like energy policy, where people have very strong political feelings, but at the same time, reality matters, and if it skewers my politics or your politics, we're not very good at overcoming that. And so these false
I find
seeds
that a
persist.
lot in the environmental world, that reality doesn't matter, that the incredible economic costs for almost no reduction in carbon, no reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, is looked at and go, wait a second, there's such a thing as opportunity costs. Mm-hmm. And as long as China is still building a new coal-fired power plant every day or every week, we can get rid of all of our plastic shopping bags here in Colorado, but it's not going to make a difference. We can put on these ridiculous renewable standards, but it won't make a difference. That's the problem over there, and I find it really frustrating talking to people who buy the lie that if climate change is real, if it is an existential threat, then we need to be talking about China. That's where it's coming from, not from here. Do I have that wrong, by the way?
It's yes and no. I share your frustration with a lot of policies that are put in place with the goal of decarbonizing the economy that aren't going to do anything. And I'm not too worried about costs because
you're an academic.
Well, yeah, and we get paid so much. No, because the public, and whether it's the public in Nigeria or the United States or France, are very sensitive to the price of goods and energy in particular. So people may remember the yellow vest protests in France from a few years ago. That was over just several euro cents increase in fuel duty. If governments impose costly policies to try to reduce emissions, and that snowballs into people's pocketbooks, into their grocery stores, into their energy bills, they are going to change their behavior. They're going to change it by voting somebody else in office who's going to lower those prices. So the only way that climate policy works is if it goes with the prevailing wind of economic growth and improving the standard of people's lives. So I'm less worried about prices because there is a check on that.
I believe there are so many ways that these prices are hidden. It's hidden in the cost of everything we buy and the products and services we use, and we don't pull those prices out. If you pulled them out and put it on a line item, yeah, people would lose it, but they don't.
Well, I mean, so in the United States, for whatever reason, even though presidents don't control gasoline prices, that when the price of gasoline gets to $4 a gallon, for some reason, that's some political threshold where people punish incumbents for that. So people are sensitive. In what we've seen over the last year and a half or 2 years with inflation in the United States and elsewhere. People may not be able to get the line item for, this is because of this bill or that fuel duty or whatever. But when prices go up, people tend to complain. We do know how to decarbonize. I mean, you take a look at a country like France, which for energy security reasons, not environmental reasons, decided in the 1970s to go headlong into nuclear power. They have one of the lowest carbon grids of any large country in the world. Same with Japan. If you look at Taiwan, Taiwan is in the process right now, as we sit here, of shutting down their nuclear fleet. And what are they doing instead? Coal and natural gas.
Why?
After Fukushima in Japan in 2011, there was a kind of a whole rethinking of nuclear power around the world. So Germany, which was heavy into nuclear power, decided to phase out nuclear power. Germany would be off coal by now if they would have kept their nuclear power plants open. So Taiwan is one of those countries that decided to phase out nuclear power. There are others like South Korea, United Arab Emirates, Finland, who have decided, no, we're going to go. And China is another example. China is doing an all of the above energy strategy with a lot of attention.
Because they need all the energy.
Because they need, and eventually India will go down that route and continental Africa. So
to jump ahead here.
Yeah.
Do you support nuclear power? Because I don't see any way that the Greens' dream of electrification is going to happen without nuclear power. And mathematically, it cannot be done.
Yeah. No, I wrote a book called The Climate Fix, in which I said it's perfectly legitimate to be afraid of climate change, and it's perfectly legitimate to be afraid of nuclear power. But guess what? If you're afraid of both of them, you got a problem, because exactly what you said, you cannot make the math of deep decarbonization work in the real world. In a spreadsheet, you can do anything. In the real world, unless you have a large proportion of nuclear generated electricity.
How bad is it if we stick with natural gas and coal? Coal, by the way, which is the most beautiful economic source of power there is. You can store it on site. Most plants have to have 90 days of supply there. So even if your terrorists attack all your rail lines, your city doesn't go dark. Natural gas doesn't have that. It's supplied on demand. So if something happens to the pipes or they freeze up, as they did in Texas, power goes off. Solar, wind is completely unreliable. It's fine for a certain portfolio, a certain section of that, but for a base load, it's not there, and it likely will not be there. So what happens if we don't decarbonize? How bad is it going to be? Are the predictions of catastrophic, life-ending heat? Does the Earth really have a fever?
The Earth does have a fever, and the big question is how hot is it going to get, and how bad will it be? But let me just say, when you talk about coal, you are exactly right that a lot of countries continue to rely on coal because it's energy security. It's not because they think it's necessarily cleaner. Natural gas is a much cleaner. If there was ample natural gas everywhere, countries would choose that over coal. Because when you burn coal, you have smog. Anyone who's been to Southeast Asia or remembers the 2008 Beijing Olympics when they shut down industry for a couple weeks before the Olympics so the skies would be blue, knows that burning coal, unless you have the most advanced technologies to scrub out the particulates, comes with a lot of environmental and human costs. There was a time, probably 20, 25 years ago, when the prevailing theory among energy modelers was that the world was going to increasingly move towards coal. There was a theory, it was called learning by doing, and basically said that we're going to keep doing what we have done in the past, but we're going to get better at it. And we're going to get better at burning coal. It's going to become cheaper, and it's just going to dominate all energy sources. It's going to displace natural gas, going to displace nuclear. It's going to displace eventually liquids. We'll have coal to liquids. And the projection was that because coal is very carbon intensive, that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were just going to zoom right up. Coal was going to increase by a factor of like 6 or 7 worldwide. In the 25 years that have passed, we've learned that actually no, the world is not transitioning from everything else to coal. The world has kind of an all of the above energy approach, and natural gas has increased. Nuclear increased for a long time, plateaued, is starting to increase again. We see a small penetration of wind and solar. It's growing, and it's going to be a significant 10, 20, 30% part of the electricity mix going forward. And so what that has done, though, is because we're not shifting all our energy to coal, we're not emitting as much carbon dioxide, and we don't expect we're going to emit those massive amounts till the end of the century. What that also means is because carbon dioxide is associated with rising temperatures, that the most extreme temperature trajectories today are viewed as implausible. So we're still changing the climate. The climate's still warming. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, under the most extreme scenarios of coal burning, it was projected that temperatures would increase by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius by 2100. Now, the current estimate for policies in place today are that it might be 2.5 degrees. So it's still an increase,
but it's not
nearly as
catastrophic
or apocalyptic as it might have been 20 years ago. That's a good news story that you don't often hear.
Because there's not an industry built around that news. There is the largest cronyism ever in the nation built around the environmental movement. And I keep hearing, oh, the oil companies, they get all their sweetheart deals. There's a little bit of truth to that if you believe that the sweetheart deal is that they get to drill on public lands and pay a smaller royalty than if it was on private lands. Great, privatize the land and then you'll take care of that problem. But we've got a system now where the green industries are some of the most corrupt, cronyistic industries I think America has ever seen. And it's propped up by regulation, and we are being played. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I'd be a little more ecumenical in my criticism there, that energy, depending on how you define it, the energy industry is something like 10 to 15% of the global economy. We're talking tens of trillions of dollars. It's one of the most important for human flourishing, but it's also one of the ones with the most power, economic power, but also connections to government. And so I don't care if it's wind, solar, geothermal, carbon capture, natural gas, nuclear. There have been a lot of sweetheart deals for energy across the board. And so
here in Colorado, for instance, Xcel Energy is not in the business of creating power. That's not their job. Their job is to build. That's what they do. And they get to charge us more for it and take out another loan and then take out another loan. So we're paying 3, 4, sometimes 5 times over for the same kilowatt because, well, we're replacing that with this, and that needs to have 5 more of these, and that needs backup generators, and that needs power lines. And so all of that is revenue out of nowhere, and they get to build stuff. Their job is not to provide power at least cost, which used to be the mission that the Colorado PUC, Public Utilities Commission, had. Their job was to make sure, here's the sweetheart deal. You get a monopoly, but we look over your shoulder to make sure you're giving us least cost power. Well, a few years ago, PUC changed that, and the explosion of gold-plated energy has happened. Hey, I want to make sure we get to this. So the things you're saying are not conventional, even if they are true. What was the backlash to you personally?
Yeah, and let me say, I do think, I've come to recognize that a lot of the work that I've done and my colleagues over the years, it's very conventional in most places. There is a debate among, I would call them elites on the left and the right, where on the left, climate is an apocalypse. For some on the right, it's a nothing burger. The reality is much more in between those polar extremes. I found myself singled out by the science advisor to President Obama. I think I'm the only academic or scientist in U.S. history, which goes back to World War II, where a science advisor has decided to call them out. For me, that led to a congressional investigation.
A congressional investigation because they did not like your research.
They specifically said that the President Obama's science advisor disagreed with what you said. This was in a letter they sent to the president of the University of Colorado. Therefore, we believe you may be taking money under the table from ExxonMobil. And so in Boulder, the Daily Camera headline, I don't know if it was on page 1, I think it was, CU professor investigated for financial irregularities. In the New York Times, probably page 821.
Stop there for a second. Stop, because my brain hurts. So the guys who have created the most cronyistic industry there is, the guys who are, through their policies, pushing real cronyism, say, we don't like what you say, we're going to go after you. In politics, we call this the politics of personal destruction. And very much like, I know of a case of a college kid who was accused of date rape. It was a sensational story in the media, and later it was retracted, the accusation. His life is ruined because you don't remember that part. You don't remember wait a second, we won. You're on the front page of the paper. You're being investigated by Congress. That makes you a lightning rod, and all you did was add up the numbers.
Yeah, and I can say, I mean, I'm through all that on the other side, and I'm doing quite well now. My work gets a lot of attention, so I can have some perspective on it. At the time, it was no fun going through it. I mean, my kids heard about it at their school in Boulder from their teachers. My wife heard about it in her job. So for a while there, professionally, it was very, very difficult. There was a time in my career when I probably would have said, we professors, we don't need tenure. Just give us 5-year contracts, and if we're doing good work, renew us. But I stuck around at CU Boulder through that time because I had tenure.
Otherwise, you think they would have fired you?
I have no doubt that I would have. It's subtle at universities, maybe not fired, but the conditions would have been such that I would have had to have left.
So the same people that took care of Ward, I'm trying to remember his name.
Ward Churchill.
But you, however, can't say what you want to say.
Well, let me say, the University of Colorado, the regents at the time, and you probably recall, this was a time when the regents were very partisan split. I think it was 5-4 Republicans to Democrats. They voted 9-0 in support of academic freedom, in support of me. And so I think it was one of the only 9-0 votes of that era for the regents. The Boulder campus was not nearly as supportive as the regents were. But for me, it was an object lesson in doing research that some perceive as controversial, whether it is or not, can be difficult even in universities as a full professor with tenure.
Now that you've been through this, are you staying at CU?
I am leaving University of Colorado Boulder at the end of the year. I'm trying to be the youngest emeritus professor in the country. I've affiliated with a think tank in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to be an independent scholar. So I'm pretty much doing the same sort of things that I've done. I'll publish peer-reviewed research. I'll testify before Congress. I'll continue writing. I have a very popular...
But you understand from my point of view,
yep.
A CU Boulder scientist saying these things, wow. You work for a think tank. Well, you're just working for the evil oil companies, and that's what's going to happen. So I want you to stay at CU. Why aren't you staying at CU? Are they making it easy for you to leave?
CU, well, there's two things. I wrote a piece on this where I called it a push and a pull. I want my work to have more policy influence, and affiliating with a think tank in Washington is kind of on the bucket list of any policy scholar. So there is that interest before I become a Deadwood professor. But I will say, and I've written about this too, University of Colorado Boulder has made it very easy for me to decide to leave.
How so?
I was removed from my department. The academic programs that I started were all canceled. All of the courses that I used to teach were taken off the books. I haven't had an office on campus for about 4 of the last 5 years.
You're a tenured professor, and you don't have a desk on that gorgeous, huge campus where they just keep building and building and building?
I was without an office for about 2 or 3 years. Long story there. I complained and complained. I got an office. And then last year I learned that they're putting it's in the stadium. They're putting a new scoreboard or video board up for the stadium, and I was told I wouldn't have access to that office until later this year. So for whatever reason.
Wait a minute. Now, I'm a survivor of CU. I graduated CU. And CU's climate and science facilities are remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
They were really built up during the space race. And your office is in the field house?
Yes.
You want to explain that one to me? Is that all right? So, in the wonderful movie Office Space, the guy who they want to get rid of, they put his office down in the basement, all alone. Tell me that's basically what this is.
That's me. Yeah.
It's nice to be loved, isn't it?
Yeah. It's. I mean, I could tell stories. We could do an entire show on experiences in academia. It would put people to sleep, but let me just say that the administrators at CU have made it very easy for me to decide to go out on my own, which, in a cost-benefit sense, you might think being a tenured full professor is kind of the top of the ladder. For me, there's another rung, and that's being an independent scholar affiliated with a think tank doing my own thing.
Can't you just have a free ride now and milk off of CU and they'll just pay you to stay quiet?
I thought about it. It's kind of like a reverse George Costanza when he showed up at the Yankees. Yeah. I know there's colleagues that have, engaged in lawsuits with the university and things like that. And, maybe I would have had a case, maybe not. But I decided rather than, all the stress and brain damage with that, I get the message. It's fine. I'll move on and do something else. And so I'm actually pretty happy with where I'm at. And, university. One thing about the University of Colorado Boulder, it's been a great place for me in many respects for a long time, really until the congressional investigation. It is one of the few major universities in this country that does not have a school of public policy or even a program in public policy. I'm a policy scholar. When I affiliated with...
By the way, I don't want it to have one.
I do.
Because I know what it's going to be.
There are some really excellent policy schools around the country where you have a diversity of people from across the political spectrum.
And you really think CU Boulder would have the diversity across a spectrum? Having survived it, knowing the professors, playing poker a few times a month with a lot of professors, let me tell you, there is no ideological diversity. I don't see any way there would be ideological diversity when the University of Colorado has to have private donations to have a visiting, not a permanent, but a visiting scholar in conservative thought. It tells me that's not welcome there.
Well, there's a few things that we could say about that. That I have never been a fan of the carve-out for the visiting scholar in conservative thought. I do think, and I've made this case to administrators at CU, that having a program, a school of public policy, where you focus on things like defense, economics, a wide range of topics would help with the diversity there. CU Boulder is not particularly unique in the landscape of academia in having an ideological slant towards one side. That said, I haven't had any experience at CU Boulder where anyone overtly, who knows what they're doing behind the scenes, but overtly has said anything remotely political to me about me or my work. I registered as an independent in Fort Collins when I was in high school and have been an independent ever since. I know that puts me far to the right of most faculty at CU Boulder. We had one of the visiting conservative scholars, Steve Hayward, probably a decade ago, and he chose my department, environmental studies, to sit in. He said, I want to see he didn't say this at the time, but all the woke stuff and all the politics. And Steve and I are friends, and afterwards he said, you know what? That was the most boring set of faculty meetings ever. People talked about assignments and reviewing things and parking spaces, and there was no politics.
But when you have a group of people, all whom share the same ideology, it's the same thing in a lot of newsrooms. And I have been close to a lot of newsrooms.
Well, let me give you an example at CU Boulder. It's been a while, maybe 15 years ago, there was an effort to start up the new, what's called an institute on campus. and they called it the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute. The decision was to focus on what's called renewable and sustainable energy, even though the world continues to get 80 to 85% of its energy from fossil fuels. So by carving out this little space for only one set of favored energy technologies, CU Boulder ensured that it would not be a big player in the energy space, because you can't talk about energy nationally or globally without still talking about fossil fuels. So that's a practical example where I think a broader diversity of thinking and maybe even politics would have helped to create an institution that would then therefore have been more diverse.
You're not going to be able to convince me that a modern public university is going to have real diversity of thought as you, who were sent down to the basement, now basically being pushed out of CU, is going the private route and going to work for a think tank. That's proof positive just how hostile campuses are to these ideas based in science. Let me ask you about this one.
Yeah.
Because I get tired of hearing the science is settled. If science is settled, that doesn't sound like science to me. It sounds like you put up a hypothesis and you prove or disprove it. And the more alarming it is in climate science, my sense is the more funding, the more attention, the bigger audiences you get, and you don't get treated like Professor Roger over here, who gets sent down with the guy with the red stapler, forgetting his name. But,
Yeah.
So there, you know what I'm asking.
Well, at some point, and this was a mistake that was made by climate advocates. There was pressure and really a willingness to make appeals to authority. The climate scientists say X, the IPCC says this, therefore you must believe it. And for a long time, and this still goes on, but it's less prevalent, there was this notion that if you could label somebody a climate skeptic and then later a climate denier, we could take them off the playing field. We don't have to listen to their ideas anymore.
Again, going back to what I said about the politics of personal destruction.
I've made this case for a long time. Climate science, take it seriously, is robust enough to survive attacks from deniers and skeptics. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I referred to, is an assessment body. We have those all over the place across the landscape of science. Almost all the time, they work really well because they're out of the public eye. They're not politicized. And so far, at least, the Working Group 1, the physical science body of the IPCC, has done a really good job. It's not the same thing that you might read about in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or NPR, but they've done a really good job. If climate scientists were to rely less on appeals to their authority than instead producing very good, strong assessment reports and then standing behind them, I think we would have less of the polarization on this particular topic. It would be more like...
Of course we would, but why would any scientist follow what you did? Why would any scientist go, I'd like to do the truth, that would be nice. Look what happened to Pielke over there. No, I like my job here. I don't like being the target of congressional hearings. Right. All right, let's bring it back to the science for just a second. How worried should we be? During the Cold War, kids were scared. We're going to blow up, we're going to blow up. And lots of people like to feed that scare. There is no more believed thought than climate change is one, causing all the terrible weather we're having, which you have disproved, and that we are on a catastrophic path that is an existential threat to humanity.
So if you take the science seriously, and again, you start with the assessments of the IPCC, you won't find the word existential threat, apocalypse in there. Climate change is real, and it poses real risks in our future. Can we say, as the late Steve Schneider, a climate scientist, once said, can we say the risks are up here and they're really, really serious, or they're down here and we'll just blow through them? No, we can't say that right now. So it's a risk management problem. It's a little bit, I mean, we should think about climate change more like we think about pandemics. Will the next pandemic, will it wipe out half of humanity, or will it be a little blip we deal with? We don't know. And so better safe than sorry, we should prepare in advance. So, so I'm of the view very much that climate change is a risk management problem. It's not one about certainties in the future. It is certainly something that's going to be with humanity for the rest of the century, for my kids, my grandkids, and after I'm long gone. And so smart policies will make people more robust and resilient in the face of weather extremes, which are a problem irrespective of climate change. And a little known fact is that the world has been decarbonizing, measured as carbon dioxide emissions as a proportion of GDP, of economic activity, for more than a century. And so when we're talking about accelerating decarbonization, we're talking about accelerating a process.
Where's the United States on that?
The United States has had a steady track record of decarbonization. The good data goes back to the 1960s. Interestingly, neither presidents nor policies have seemed to really change the rate at which we've been decarbonizing. So an important research question I have is, well, what would? If the United States said, oh, we're going to build 100 more nuclear power plants and we're going to retire all of our coal and some natural gas, that would move the dial. But it'd be big policies like that.
I have a hard time seeing wacky environmentalists accept that. What I have noticed inside the environmental movement is that there is a small but growing number of environmentalists who can do basic math. And they know what is not sustainable without either large-scale hydroelectric or large-scale nuclear or both. And so you're starting to see people who believe in a catastrophic heat wave saying, we've got to do these things.
Right.
Big energy doesn't like that. Right. Big green doesn't like that, right, because they want to do all this other good stuff. So let me compare it to this.
Yep.
What those people feel about a planet boiling, I feel about debt, money being made out of nothing. And in fact, I believe the existential threat of the United States going bankrupt and the rest of the world going bankrupt with it is much more likely to happen, if you look at the numbers, than an existential threat from climate change. But this issue gets no coverage. We have not figured out how to lie and say these pictures of floods are caused by this.
Right.
The best we can do is, hey, your inflation is bad.
Right.
And look at the cost of food, and you kind of feel it.
Right.
But when you look at the trajectory of what is happening, it is cataclysmic, and it's right there. So how do we get people to go, well, if climate change is an issue, we better solve this issue so we can afford to address it?
Yeah, I mean, the smartest environmental policies often don't come from the environmental wing of the environmental movement. It's the smartest policies. Many of the forward-looking environmental policies were passed under the Richard Nixon administration, for example. These are policies that, again, they go with the direction of economic growth. They make people's lives better. They increase GDP, therefore tax receipts, maybe helping deal with debt. I think that a carbon tax is, in this country, inevitable at some point, for reasons you described, because there is going to need to be more revenue to help compress that deficit gap that's out there and servicing debt. And it's going to have to come from somewhere. And so
But it doesn't matter what you tax, it comes from people.
Yes, that's
Companies don't pay taxes. People pay taxes, directly and indirectly.
That's right.
Which is going to cause more economic hardship.
Right.
I don't see a way to stop an economic collapse. And it might be 20 years from now, it could be 30 years from now, but the numbers are there. You cannot keep spending money you don't have without it catching up. And it's going to be worldwide, and it's going to be awful.
So that's the equivalent of the we're going to burn all the coal scenario that the climate movement had and is walking away from at this point.
Is there something similar on the economic side? Stop burning coal on the economic side?
Well, these are the same arguments. I mean, this is not the first time we've gone through this dynamic in the environmental space. that in the 1960s and 70s, the concern was about runaway population growth. And so
yes, the UK by 2000 would be uninhabitable, would be overrun with people.
Right. So as a policy scholar, I'm very sensitive to predictions of doom and collapse, decades out in the future based on extrapolations from where we think we are or have been recently. So maybe you're right. We're on the precipice of a debt-fueled collapse, but in other
Which one is more likely, a debt-fueled collapse or the Earth burning up in the next 100 years? And destroying life.
Yeah, I think they're both pretty unlikely at this point. So
let's finish it up with this.
Yeah.
If you're talking to somebody who just hears what they hear on the news, who wants to be a good environmental steward, who looks at the Prius that drives by and go, good on you, I can't wait till I can afford a Tesla, and I get those subsidies to do it. I wish only, so it's not just the rich people. What do they need to know about climate? What is, if you had one message for them?
One message would be to understand the scale of energy and energy services worldwide and how big it is. It is not a simple issue where you say, well, we're just going to unplug our natural gas plant and plug in a few wind turbines and slap some solar panels on the roof. The scale of energy consumption in this country worldwide is mind-bogglingly large. And we're going to need worldwide to eventually double, triple that amount of energy. It's going to have to come from somewhere. It is not, I call it, Jed Clampett syndrome, which some people of a certain generation will know. It's not just that energy comes up free, from the ground and everybody gets rich. It takes forethought, and it takes public and private sectors working together. And so we're going to need advanced nuclear. We're going to need to figure out how to electrify and move electrons from here to there. We're going to need to ensure that countries around the world, as they grow, they do feel secure. And so something like President Biden's liquefied natural gas pause created a lot of disruptions in how our allies in particular thought about us, because the U.S. was thought to be a reliable supplier. You're not going to switch over. If you're Pakistan, which saw the natural gas shipments float on by and go to Germany after Russia invaded Ukraine, you're going to go back to coal. And so the decisions we make as a nation, both in terms of national security, in terms of innovation and industrial policies, are going to lay the groundwork for global energy consumption for the next 50 years plus. And so climate change and energy policy has to be more than just witnessing to, don't use straws, drive a Prius. These are big policy decisions that you and I aren't going to affect with our lifestyle choices. And so when I teach my students energy policy, I try to get their head in that space of understanding scale and understanding significance.
Say that part again, that what you and I do as personal lifestyle choices, we're gonna put the solar on our top of our house. We're gonna buy that Tesla. Does it make a difference?
So I tell people, if it feels right and makes you happy, do it. But don't have the impression that if you do that, it's going to alter the trajectory of the climate or the energy system. It's just not. There are billions and billions of people around the world who do not enjoy the energy services we enjoy every day. And they want that. And they're going to get that eventually. And so if someone says, I don't want to eat meat, fine, great choice. That's not a substitute, though, for thinking through, all right, how do we design a U.S. is an energy superpower. How do we take advantage of that to help shape the future of global energy? These are big, important questions. The U.S. Congress has not had a comprehensive energy bill since 2005. That's 2 decades without really thinking through at a national level, how do we want to position ourselves? Over those 2 decades, the United States went from a big importer of energy to now the world's biggest exporter.
Which, when you and I were kids, was science fiction.
Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with new technologies like hydraulic fracturing.
Yeah. So those technologies were an overnight success 40 years in the making. And they were the result of, of energy policy decisions made in the 1970s. And so the decisions we're making in the 2020s are going to affect the energy policy outcomes in the 2070s and the 2080s. And so that's part of the scale and the time frame that we have to start thinking through these issues. And not every citizen has to really be down in the weeds there. But I think it's, number one, the worst case scenarios are off the table. Number two, it's a sticky, difficult problem. Climate change is real. It's not the end of the world, but it's something we probably want to deal with as we're thinking about energy policy. And oh yeah, maybe we should think about energy policy. I'm hopeful that whatever combination of Congresses and presidents we have in the coming next generation, my kids, as they go, become my age, energy policy is something that both parties think about, discuss, and debate, because it's been too long without doing that.
People want to get information. Where's a good source?
I have a popular Substack called The Honest Broker. Just search Pielke, Pielke, and Substack, and you'll find me. And
The Honest Broker. Roger, this has been great. Thank you so much.
John, thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.